Most men reach a certain age believing they have seen enough to recognize patterns. In business, in friendships, in life, behavior follows incentives, cause leads to effect. Yet when it comes to women, even intelligent, experienced men will sometimes shrug and say, "She's just unpredictable." That statement feels harmless. It is not. It quietly strips you of pattern recognition and replaces it with resignation. What often looks like emotional chaos is not chaos at all. It is calibration. When a woman shifts tone, delays a response, teases you in a way that feels slightly pointed, or pulls back after warmth, the instinct is to interpret it through one of two lenses. Either she is losing interest or she is playing games. Both interpretations put you on defense. Both assume randomness or manipulation. Neither assumes intelligence. But human beings rarely behave randomly in relational dynamics, especially not when attraction is involved. What looks like inconsistency is often assessment. She is not trying to confuse you. She is observing how you regulate yourself when the emotional temperature changes. You have seen this in other arenas. A business partner applies pressure to see if you panic. A negotiation shifts tone to test whether you become reactive. A friend makes a sharp joke to gauge your insecurity. Adults test for stability all the time. They just do not call it testing. The problem is that many men over 40 were raised on a simple narrative about attraction. Be confident, be successful, be direct. If she likes you, she will be consistent. If she is inconsistent, she is not worth your time. That framework worked when dating was simpler and ego was stronger than insight. It breaks down when you start dealing with emotionally perceptive women who are not just looking for chemistry but for emotional steadiness. When her energy shifts slightly and you feel your chest tighten, that moment is data. Not about her instability, but about yours. The subtle withdrawal is not chaos, it is a change in stimulus, and your nervous system responds before your intellect does. Older men sometimes mislabel this because unpredictability threatens identity. You have built competence in your career, you handle crises, you provide. So when a woman's behavior feels ambiguous, it challenges the belief that experience guarantees control. It does not. The more accurate frame is this: attraction at this stage of life is less about excitement and more about evaluation. Emotional shifts are often probes, not punishments. They reveal whether your confidence is internal or dependent on smooth conditions. When you stop calling it randomness, you regain agency. You begin observing instead of reacting. You ask what is being measured instead of assuming something is broken. And once you see that pattern clearly, the real question emerges. Why does this calibration intensify specifically when the man across from her is older, established, and supposedly mature? If you are in your 40s, 50s, or early 60s, you walk into the room with more than just presence. You carry history, experience, scars, successes, regrets. That weight changes how women perceive you before you even speak. When you were younger, attraction was often built on projection. Potential mattered more than proof. A woman could be drawn to ambition, edge, raw chemistry. Uncertainty even added excitement. At that stage, volatility could be interpreted as passion. That is not the dynamic anymore. With an older man, the question is rarely, is he exciting? The deeper question is he stable? Not financially, not socially, emotionally. Many men assume maturity alone commands respect. They believe that gray hair, life lessons, or professional success automatically signal grounded masculinity. Sometimes they do. But women who have lived enough life themselves understand something crucial. Age does not guarantee emotional regulation. It only guarantees time passed. She has likely encountered older men who were successful yet reactive, established yet insecure, divorced but still angry, charismatic but quietly fragile when challenged. Experience teaches women to look beyond surface credentials. They are not just assessing what you have built, they are assessing how you hold yourself when the environment shifts. This is where the dynamic changes from excitement to evaluation. An older man is assumed to have already faced adversity, career setbacks, relationship failures, betrayal, financial pressure, health scares, the silent recalibrations that come with realizing you are no longer 25. Because of that, there is an unspoken expectation. If you have lived this long, you should have integrated something. So when she shifts tone, questions you subtly, delays communication, or introduces mild friction, it is not random behavior, it is an inquiry. Has time refined you or just hardened you? Emotional steadiness becomes the true marker of value. You can have money and still seek constant reassurance. You can have status and still crumble at perceived rejection. You can speak about leadership yet become defensive when teased. These contradictions are visible to a perceptive woman within minutes. Older men are tested differently because the stakes feel different. A younger man can be forgiven for emotional impulsiveness. It fits the developmental stage. An older man who reacts with visible insecurity raises a deeper concern. If he has not learned to regulate himself by now, will he ever? This is not cruelty, it is risk management. Women who are no longer naive about relationships are looking for containment. A man whose nervous system remains steady when hers fluctuates. A man who does not need the atmosphere to be perfect in order to feel confident. And this is where many men misinterpret what happens next, because the testing rarely comes in dramatic confrontations. It appears in something far subtler, a small emotional disruption that seems insignificant on the surface, yet reveals everything underneath. The behavior itself is rarely dramatic. That is why so many men miss it. It often begins with a slight change in emotional temperature. A woman who was warm becomes briefly cooler. A message that once came quickly now arrives hours later. A playful tease carries a sharper edge. A light disagreement appears where harmony used to sit. Nothing explosive, nothing openly hostile, just enough friction to register in your nervous system. Most men label this as mixed signals, but mixed signals imply confusion. What is happening here is not confusion. It is observation under altered conditions. Emotional disruption is one of the simplest ways to assess regulation. When everything is smooth, anyone can appear confident. When validation is consistent, even insecure men feel stable. The real data appears when certainty is removed, when the rhythm shifts, when you are no longer sure where you stand. Teasing, for example, is not always about humor. It is often a probe. If she lightly challenges your competence or questions a statement you made, she is not necessarily attacking you. She is watching how tightly your identity is attached to being right. Do you smile and stay grounded, or do you stiffen and over-explain? Delayed responses function similarly. In a world of instant communication, timing becomes psychological leverage. When her availability changes, it creates a small vacuum. That vacuum reveals your internal state. Do you continue with your day unshaken, or does your focus narrow around the absence? Mild contradiction is another subtle test. She may disagree on something inconsequential. Music, travel, a minor opinion. The content is rarely the point. The reaction is. Does disagreement threaten connection in your mind, or can you hold difference without tension? Then there is strategic withdrawal. Not disappearance, not dramatic silence, just a slight pulling back of enthusiasm. A reduction in emotional intensity. This is perhaps the clearest probe of all. When warmth decreases, does your behavior escalate to compensate? None of these behaviors require malicious intent. In fact, most of them are instinctive. Human beings assess safety through pressure. In relationships, pressure is emotional. If she senses long-term potential, the instinct to evaluate deepens. She wants to know what happens when the current is not perfectly calm. Older men often struggle here because they expect linear progression. Interest shown should mean interest maintained. Attraction expressed should mean attraction consistent, but real relational dynamics are not linear. They oscillate. What feels like instability is often a stress test in miniature. And here is the uncomfortable truth. These moments are not measuring your charm. They are measuring your nervous system. They are asking whether your confidence is self-contained or dependent on her steady approval. The problem is that when a man misreads these disruptions as rejection or manipulation, he shifts into protection mode. And protection mode is where subtle insecurity begins to leak. Failure in these moments rarely looks dramatic. It looks reasonable. That is what makes it dangerous. When her tone cools slightly or her responses slow down, many men move quickly to restore equilibrium. They clarify statements that did not require clarification. They add context to jokes that were already understood. They explain themselves in ways that feel measured and logical. On the surface, this appears mature. Underneath, it often signals discomfort with ambiguity. Over-explaining is not confidence, it is anxiety disguised as articulation. Then there is the quiet chase for reassurance. It does not always look needy, it can appear subtle. A few extra messages, a shift in tone to regain warmth, a carefully phrased question designed to confirm where things stand. The intention is stability, the effect is pressure. When you seek reassurance too quickly, you communicate that emotional fluctuation unsettles you. Other men move in the opposite direction. Instead of leaning forward, they pull back abruptly. If she withdraws slightly, they withdraw further. If she delays, they mirror the delay with calculated coldness. This is often framed as strength. In reality, it is ego protection. It says, if I sense distance, I will create more of it, so I am not exposed. Rigidity is another common reaction. The man who suddenly becomes overly firm, overly stoic, almost performative in his composure. He believes that confidence means emotional stillness at all costs, so he shuts down visible response. The problem is that true steadiness feels relaxed. Forced steadiness feels tense. In all these reactions, the pattern is the same. The man is trying to control the emotional environment rather than regulate himself within it. Many men in midlife believe confidence is dominance, that if you remain unbothered, detached, or slightly above the interaction, you pass the test. But women who are perceptive can sense the difference between calm and suppression, between grounded and guarded. Subtle insecurity leaks through micro shifts. A tightened jaw, a quicker reply, a longer silence that feels intentional rather than natural. You cannot hide regulation. It shows in pacing, tone, and timing. The deeper issue is this. When you interpret her emotional shift as a threat, your nervous system moves into defense, and defense always narrows you. It makes you smaller, even if you attempt to appear bigger. Most men do not fail because they lack value. They fail because they cannot tolerate uncertainty without trying to manage it. And that inability to sit calmly inside fluctuation is precisely what the test was measuring in the first place. The response that changes everything is quieter than most men expect. It is not dominance, it is not indifference, it is not strategic silence, it is regulation. Mature masculine steadiness begins with containment, not suppression. Containment means you feel the shift in energy and you allow it to register without immediately acting on it. You notice the slight cooling of tone, the delayed reply, the playful challenge. Your nervous system responds, but you do not hand it the steering wheel. This is where many men misunderstand confidence. They think it means being unaffected. In reality, it means being affected without being destabilized. When she teases you lightly, you do not rush to defend your competence. You can smile, stay present, even amplify the humor without tightening. When she disagrees with you, you do not interpret it as disrespect. You allow the difference to exist. You remain curious instead of corrective. Calm curiosity is powerful because it communicates internal security. You are not scrambling to restore harmony. You are not punishing her for disrupting it. You are simply observing and engaging from a steady center. If her responses slow down, you do not accelerate yours to compensate. Your life continues, your rhythm remains intact. This is not a tactic, it is alignment. Your sense of self is not dependent on constant emotional reinforcement. What this creates is something deeper than excitement. It creates safety. Safety does not mean softness, it means predictability of character. She can feel that your mood does not swing wildly with circumstance, that your interest does not turn brittle under pressure. That disagreement will not trigger contempt. For a woman who has lived enough life to see volatility up close, that steadiness is rare. And paradoxically, it increases polarity. When a man is regulated, he does not collapse into her emotions, nor does he dominate them. He holds his frame without force. He listens without surrendering his perspective. He can absorb tension without escalating it. That combination of strength and flexibility is compelling because it feels adult. Attraction at this stage of life is less about sparks and more about sustainability. Emotional stability signals that connection with you will not feel like walking on unstable ground. This is why older men who master regulation often become more attractive with age, not less. Not because of money, not because of status, but because they have integrated their experiences instead of being ruled by them. When you can remain steady while the emotional current shifts, you communicate something words never could. You are not reacting to the moment. You are grounded within yourself. And that grounded presence is what quietly separates the men who are merely aging from the men who become deeply compelling.